Instructor Moran flexed his 4 muscular arms, each one capable of crushing a steel beam, as he surveyed the combat training facility of the prestigious Galactic Military Academy. The Zeltharian had been molding warriors for 3 decades, and his reputation preceded him like a bad smell in a recycled air system. Students whispered his name in the corridors, usually followed by creative curses in 17 different languages. The academy itself was a monument to military excellence, floating majestically in the void between 3-star systems. Its crystalline spires housed the galaxy's finest military minds, and its halls echoed with the footsteps of future generals, admirals, and tactical masterminds. At least, that was what the brochures claimed. Moran had seen enough fumbling cadets to know that marketing departments existed throughout the universe, and they all shared the same talent for creative exaggeration. Today's advanced combat assessment class would be particularly entertaining. 23 cadets from across the galaxy had gathered, representing the supposed cream of their respective species' military potential. There were Krillians with their razor-sharp reflexes, towering Vorthacs with hide thick enough to stop plasma rounds, and sleek Centaurians whose speed made cheetahs look arthritic. And then there was Amy Kowalski. The lone human sat in the back corner, looking about as impressive as a wilted lettuce leaf in a garden of exotic alien flora. Moran's compound eyes focused on her with something approaching pity mixed with professional disdain. Humans had only recently joined the Galactic Alliance, and their inclusion in the Academy was widely considered a diplomatic courtesy rather than a military necessity. After all, what could a species that had barely mastered interstellar travel possibly contribute to cosmic warfare? Amy appeared to be half asleep, her brown hair falling across her face as she slouched in her chair. Her fellow cadets had long since stopped bothering to include her in their pre-class discussions about tactical theory and weapons optimization. She was, as Cadet Vexel had so eloquently put it last week, about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a plasma storm. Moran's mandibles clicked with amusement. Today would be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly why the Academy's admission standards needed serious review. Sometimes, the most effective teaching method was a practical demonstration of limitations. Attention, future cannon fodder, Moran announced, his voice carrying the authoritative boom that had terrified generations of cadets. Today we assess your combat readiness through practical demonstration. Try not to embarrass your entire species. The class snapped to attention with military precision, except for Amy, who continued staring out the viewport at the swirling nebula beyond. Moran's second pair of eyes twitched. Apparently, the human had mistaken his combat class for a scenic tour. Cadet Zephic, demonstrate your species' renowned reflexes, Moran commanded, gesturing to a sleek Krillian, whose silver skin gleamed under the harsh training lights. Zephic moved to the center of the mat, his movements fluid as liquid mercury. Moran activated the combat drone, watching with professional satisfaction as the mechanical opponent launched a barrage of training bolts. The Krillian's response was poetry in motion, dodging, weaving, and striking with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. Every movement calculated, every response instantaneous. Adequate, Moran grunted, which in Zeltharian instruction was practically a standing ovation. Cadet Thorgan, show us Vorthac resilience. The massive Vorthac lumbered forward, his rocky hide scraping against the floor. Where Zephic had been speed and finesse, Thorgan was raw, unstoppable force. The combat drone's training bolts bounced harmlessly off his natural armor as he charged forward, crushing the mechanical opponent with a casual backhand that would have pulverized a shuttle. Even Cadet Liara, the Centaurian, with the unfortunate tendency to speak in mathematical equations, managed an impressive display of tactical awareness, calculating trajectories and probability matrices, while dismantling 3 training drones simultaneously. Through it all, Amy Kowalski sat with the focused attention of a rock contemplating its next career move. Her eyes had that glazed quality Moran associated with beings who had clearly suffered some form of cranial trauma. She was probably wondering where the nearest snack dispenser was located, or perhaps pondering whatever primitive philosophical concepts passed for deep thought among her species. Fascinating, Moran muttered to himself. The human appears to be achieving new depths of disengagement. I wonder if she realizes this is a military academy and not a vacation resort. The other cadets had begun shooting glances in Amy's direction, some amused, others embarrassed on behalf of their carbon-based colleague. Cadet Zephic actually face-palmed, which was particularly impressive given that Krillians had retractable features. Moran's irritation reached a boiling point that could have powered a small starship. Here he was, trying to forge the next generation of galactic defenders, and the Academy had seen fit to include what appeared to be a tourist. Right then, Moran announced, his 4 arms crossing in a display that had intimidated warlords across 3 sectors. Time for the blindfolded reflex assessment. Nothing quite separates the warriors from the wishful thinkers like removing one of your primary senses. He held up a sensory dampening hood, its dark material designed to block all visual input while maintaining breathability. Several cadets shifted nervously. This particular test had a reputation for humbling even the most confident students. The concept is elegantly simple, Moran continued, pacing with the predatory grace of his species. You don the hood. I throw objects at you with varying degrees of lethality, and you demonstrate whether evolution blessed your species with survival instincts or a death wish. Cadet Zephyk went first, naturally. The Krillian's performance was textbook perfect, catching training spheres and deflecting practice batons with mechanical precision. His silver skin rippled with each movement, sensors beneath the surface mapping trajectories through sound and air displacement. Thorgan followed, his massive hands swatting aside projectiles like annoying insects. The Vorthak's thick hide meant he could afford to be less precise, though his reflexes proved surprisingly sharp for someone resembling a walking geological formation. Cadet Kowalski, Moran called out, his tone dripping with the kind of false encouragement typically reserved for children attempting to tie their shoes. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate human adaptability. The snickers from her classmates were barely concealed. Cadet Vexel actually made a sound that might have been laughter if Andorian respiratory systems were capable of producing anything remotely pleasant. Amy looked up from whatever fascinating void she'd been contemplating. Sure, why not? She said with the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to watch paint dry. As she stood and walked toward the center of the mat, Moran felt that particular satisfaction that comes from witnessing impending educational disasters. This would be the perfect teaching moment, a demonstration of why the Academy needed to maintain its standards. He moved to the weapons rack, his compound eyes scanning the available options. Training spheres seemed too gentle. Practice batons lacked drama, but there, gleaming with lethal beauty, hung a perfectly balanced combat knife. Moran's mandibles curved into what other species might charitably call a smile. Sometimes, the most effective lessons required a touch of genuine danger. Amy pulled the sensory dampening hood over her head with all the ceremony of someone putting on a sock. The material settled over her features, transforming her from a merely unremarkable human into what appeared to be a small fabric-covered statue of mediocrity. Moran hefted the combat knife, feeling its familiar weight in his primary right hand. The blade was a masterpiece of Zeltharian craftsmanship, forged from materials that could cut through starship hull plating. Its edge gleamed with the kind of sharpness that made lawyers jealous. This particular knife had seen actual combat in the Outer Rim conflicts, and its blade bore the microscopic scars of battles that had shaped galactic history. Humans, he thought, watching Amy's motionless form, the galaxy's most overconfident underachievers. They stumble out of their single-system cradle, barely capable of faster-than-light travel, and somehow convince themselves they belong among species that have been perfecting warfare since before their son was born. The other cadets had formed a semicircle, anticipation crackling in the air like static before a plasma storm. Several were already composing messages to send home about the spectacular human failure they were about to witness. Cadet Vexel had his recording device ready, presumably to capture the moment for posterity and possible blackmail purposes. Here's a species that considers pointy sticks a significant technological advancement. Moran continued his internal commentary, drawing his arm back for the throw. They've got no natural armor, no enhanced reflexes, no evolutionary advantages whatsoever. They're basically ambulatory target practice. He released the knife with professional precision, sending it spinning through the air in a perfect arc. The throw was calculated to test reflexes to their absolute limit, fast enough to challenge even a Krillian's enhanced nervous system, accurate enough to require split-second timing for a successful catch. The blade whistled through the recycled air with lethal intent, its rotation creating a hypnotic pattern as it closed the distance between instructor and student. This was the moment where Amy Kowalski would learn the harsh reality of galactic military standards. The knife should have embedded itself in the wall behind her, or at best clattered to the floor after a clumsy defensive swipe. Instead, Amy's hand moved. Not quickly, not desperately, not with the flailing panic Moran expected. Her hand simply moved, fingers closing around the knife's handle with the casual precision of someone plucking fruit from a tree. The blade's deadly rotation stopped instantly, the weapon now resting comfortably in her grip, as if it had always belonged there. Amy stood motionless for a heartbeat, the knife held perfectly still in her right hand. The silence that followed was the kind typically reserved for funerals, natural disasters, and moments when the universe decides to completely rewrite the laws of physics. Even the environmental system seemed to pause in disbelief. Moran's compound eyes performed functions they had never been designed for, attempting to process information that his brain categorically refused to accept. His mandibles hung open in an expression that would have been comical if anyone in the room had retained the ability to find anything amusing. 22 cadets stood frozen like statues, their various respiratory systems apparently forgetting their primary function. "Class over?" Amy asked, her voice muffled by the sensory hood but carrying the same tone someone might use to inquire about lunch plans. The question hit the stunned classroom like a photon torpedo to the brainstem. Here was a human who had just performed what amounted to a minor miracle of reflexes and spatial awareness, and she was asking if she could leave early. Moran's vocal cords produced a sound that resembled a garbage disposal attempting to process a musical instrument. His forearms remained frozen in their post-throw position, creating a tableau that looked like he was either conducting an invisible orchestra or experiencing some form of neurological malfunction. "Did she just?" Cadet Suffolk whispered, his silver skin flickering between different shades of confusion. "The human caught a combat knife," Forgan rumbled, his voice carrying the bewilderment of someone watching gravity flow upward, blindfolded, without hesitation. "Maybe it was luck," suggested Cadet Liara, though her mathematical mind was already calculating probability matrices that made her optical sensors water. "The odds of accidentally catching a spinning blade by the handle are approximately—" "Oh no, that's not possible." Amy reached up and pulled off the sensory hood with the same casual motion she'd used to remove a hat in polite company. Her brown hair fell back into place, and she blinked a few times as her eyes adjusted to the training room's lighting. She held out the combat knife handle first toward Moran, apparently unaware that she'd just violated several fundamental laws of physics and military training. "Thanks for the workout," she said, offering what might charitably be called a smile. "Should I put this back on the rack or—" Moran stared at the offered weapon as if it were a live grenade with a faulty timer. His mind, trained through decades of military precision and tactical analysis, had apparently decided to take an unscheduled vacation to somewhere reality made more sense. "You," he began, his voice emerging as a croak that would have embarrassed a dying toad. "How did you—" "Oh that." Amy glanced at the knife with the interest typically reserved for a moderately entertaining weather report. "Standard reflex test. Right. We had similar drills back on Earth, though usually with tennis balls or foam targets. This was a nice change of pace." The other cadets had begun whispering among themselves in multiple languages, creating a polyglot chorus of disbelief that sounded like a diplomatic translation error come to life. Moran attempted to reassemble his professional composure, though the result resembled someone trying to fold a map in a hurricane. "Right. Yes. Standard procedure. Completely routine." His mandibles clicked nervously, producing a rhythm that suggested his nervous system was attempting to communicate in Morse code. Later that evening, Moran sat in his private quarters, staring at his holographic display with the intensity of someone trying to solve the mysteries of the universe, using only a broken calculator. Amy Kowalski's personnel file floated before him, and for the first time in his career, he was actually reading beyond the species classification. Human female, age 24, homeworld designation Earth, Sol system, he muttered, scrolling through what he had previously dismissed as irrelevant biographical data. Standard carbon-based bipedal physiology, no apparent genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements. He paused at a section he had glossed over during initial processing. Military service record, Earth Defense Force, Special Operations Division. Moran read aloud, his voice gaining the tone of someone discovering their pet goldfish could perform calculus. Specialized training in asymmetric warfare, survival tactics, And what in the 7 rings of Andromeda is knife fighting? The files continued to unfold like a particularly disturbing revelation. Amy had completed something called Navy SEAL training, a designation that made no sense whatsoever, since Earth was primarily a terrestrial world. Why would they name military units after aquatic mammals? Humans were even stranger than he had imagined. But the more he read, the more a disturbing picture began to emerge. Humans, it seemed, were the product of a rather unpleasant evolutionary process, where most civilized species had developed technology to overcome environmental challenges. Humans had apparently decided to become the environmental challenge. Natural predator species, he read from a xenobiology report, his mandibles clicking with growing alarm. Evolved persistence hunting tactics, capable of tracking prey across vast distances through endurance rather than speed. Highly developed spatial awareness, due to arboreal ancestry, and ground-based persistence hunting requirements. The report continued with details that made Moran's hide crawl. Humans could track movement through sound, air displacement, and even scent. Their binocular vision provided exceptional depth perception, while their flexible spinal structure allowed for rapid directional changes that would hospitalize most other species. Biologically optimized for violence, he muttered, feeling like someone who had just discovered their harmless houseplant was actually a carnivorous species with delusions of grandeur. The files included training footage from Amy's Earth military service. Moran watched in fascination and growing horror as she moved through obstacle courses that would have challenged a Krillion's enhanced reflexes. But where other species relied on genetic advantages or technological augmentation, Amy used something far more disturbing: learned instinct. In one recording, she was blindfolded and placed in a combat simulation against multiple opponents. Her movements were fluid, calculated, predatory. She used sound, air currents, even the heat signatures of her opponents to navigate and strike with lethal precision. The human military had taken an already dangerous predator and taught it to hunt in the dark. Sweet merciful stars, Moran breathed, watching Amy disarm 3 opponents simultaneously while unable to see. They turned her into a weapon, but the most unsettling revelation came from the psychological evaluation reports. Humans, unlike most galactic species, actually became calmer under pressure. Their stress response system was designed not to panic, but to achieve what their military called combat focus, a state where time seemed to slow, awareness heightened, and motor skills reached peak efficiency. She was not daydreaming in class, Moran realized with dawning comprehension. She was maintaining a relaxed state to optimize reflexive response. The human was prepared for violence while appearing completely passive. He leaned back in his chair, 4 arms crossed, contemplating the implications. The Galactic Alliance had not admitted a primitive species seeking guidance and protection. They had unknowingly recruited a planet full of highly efficient, naturally evolved killing machines who were polite enough to ask permission before demonstrating their capabilities. The next morning's class began with an atmosphere thick enough to cut with the same combat knife that had started this entire revelation. Moran entered the training facility with the careful gait of someone who had spent the night recalibrating his understanding of the universe and found the results deeply unsettling. Amy sat in her usual corner position, looking exactly as unremarkable as she had 24 hours earlier. The difference was that Moran now understood this was likely a deliberate tactical choice rather than natural human incompetence. "Cadet Kowalski," he began, his voice carrying a respect that surprised everyone in the room including himself. "Perhaps you could enlighten the class about human combat methodology." Amy looked up with the mild interest of someone asked to explain how toasters work. "Sure, I guess. What specifically did you want to know?" "Yesterday's knife catch," Moran said, gesturing with one of his secondary arms. "Walk us through your thought process." "Oh, that." Amy shrugged with characteristic human casualness. "Basic sound triangulation, air displacement tracking, and rotational mathematics." The knife was spinning at roughly 47 rotations per second, thrown from 8.3 meters at an upward trajectory of 12 degrees. Simple trigonometry to calculate intercept point and timing. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Cadet Liara's optical sensors recalibrating as she processed the mathematical implications. "You performed multivariable calculus in your head," the Centaurian whispered, while blindfolded, "in approximately 2 seconds. Well, yeah, Amy replied, as if this was roughly equivalent to remembering to breathe. That's standard situational awareness training. We learned it right after knife fighting and before the advanced explosives course. Cadet Thorgan, who had previously dismissed humans as squishy weaklings, now studied Amy with the fascination typically reserved for dangerous wildlife. Your species teaches weapons combat to all military personnel. Pretty much, Amy confirmed. Though most of my training was with Brandon Torres' unit back on Earth. Special operations tends to be more comprehensive. Moran felt his mandibles click involuntarily. Brandon Torres was apparently another human name, which meant there were more of these walking weapon systems scattered throughout human space. Cadet Zufik had a question yesterday, Moran said, attempting to process this information while maintaining his instructional authority. He wondered about human evolutionary advantages. Oh, we're persistence predators, Amy explained with the tone of someone discussing grocery shopping. Evolved to hunt large game across continental distances. Our ancestors would literally chase animals until they died of exhaustion. Takes about 3 days on average. Several cadets made sounds that suggested their respective species' equivalents of horrified fascination. We also developed pattern recognition and spatial reasoning to track prey through complex terrain, Amy continued, apparently unaware that she was describing what most species would consider nightmare fuel. Plus, our stress response system kicks in during dangerous situations, which slows perceived time and increases reaction speed. Pretty handy for combat scenarios. Moran realized his entire approach to human training had been fundamentally flawed. He had been treating Amy like a weak student who needed protection and guidance, when he should have been treating her like a military asset who needed direction and purpose. Right then, he said, his forearms spreading in a gesture that conveyed newfound respect. I believe we need to redesign our training protocols. Within hours, news of the knife incident had spread through the academy faster than a plasma leak in a pressurized hull. The story grew with each retelling, evolving from human-caught knife to human-destroyed combat drone with thrown utensils by the time it reached the faculty lounge. Commander Tom Malley sat in his office reviewing incident reports when Admiral Vashi's communication request arrived. The Admiral's holographic form materialized with the expression of someone who had been asked to explain why the laws of physics were apparently taking a sabbatical. Tom, Admiral Vashi began without preamble. Please tell me the reports about Instructor Moran's human student are exaggerated. Afraid not, Admiral, Commander Malley replied, pulling up the relevant files. According to multiple witnesses, Cadet Kowalski caught a combat knife blindfolded. Moran's been reviewing her background ever since. And what did he find? Earth Military Special Forces training. Apparently humans have been perfecting asymmetric warfare for several thousand years. Their entire species development focused on becoming more effective at violence. Admiral Vashi's expression shifted through several phases that suggested his understanding of galactic military dynamics was undergoing emergency maintenance. Are you telling me we've admitted a planet of natural-born soldiers to the Alliance? That appears to be the situation, sir. In the instructor's quarters, the revelation was causing what could politely be termed widespread philosophical adjustment. Professor Kethrel, who taught advanced strategy, had spent the morning recalculating human tactical potential, and discovered that most of his assumptions about their capabilities needed to be fed into the nearest recycling unit. They hunt by exhaustion, he muttered to his colleague, Professor Zan. Their military doctrine is based on the concept that persistence and adaptability overcome technological superiority. Do you realize what this means for our combat simulations? Professor Zan, whose tentacles were currently tied in knots that expressed bewilderment in 17 different languages, could only gurgle in response. Meanwhile, in the cadet dormitories, Amy Kowalski had become the subject of intense scientific curiosity. Her fellow students now approached her with the careful respect typically reserved for unstable explosives or important religious artifacts. Is it true your species can track targets across entire continents? Cadet Vexel asked during evening meal period, his tone suggesting this was the most fascinating thing he had learned since discovering interstellar travel. Well, yeah, Amy replied, focused on what appeared to be an unsuccessful attempt to identify her dinner through conventional means. Though we usually use vehicles now. Walking takes forever. Cadet Thorgan nodded sagely. The human employs efficiency optimization. You employ laziness. Amy corrected. There's a difference. By week's end, the Academy's entire approach to human integration had undergone revision. Amy's reputation had transformed from harmless tourist to politely contained natural disaster, and instructors were quietly updating their lesson plans to account for species with built-in combat optimization. The following week's combat assessment class bore little resemblance to its predecessor. Morin entered the training facility with a collection of specialized equipment that suggested he had been shopping in the extremely dangerous section of the Academy's weapons catalog. "Today we explore advanced multi-species tactical integration," he announced, his forearms gesturing toward an obstacle course that looked like it had been designed by someone with a grudge against the concept of safety. "Cadet Kowalski will demonstrate human adaptive methodology while her colleagues observe and learn." Amy looked up from her usual corner with mild interest. Were we finally getting to the fun stuff? The casual way she referred to what appeared to be a death trap as fun stuff sent collective shivers through her classmates' various nervous systems. "Indeed," Morin replied, realizing that his definition of challenging and Amy's definition of entertaining might be uncomfortably similar. "Your mission parameters include hostile environment navigation, multiple opponent engagement, and equipment improvisation under time pressure." "Cool," Amy said, standing and stretching with the enthusiasm of someone about to enjoy a pleasant afternoon activity. "Do I get to work with a team, or is this solo?" Cadet Sefik raised a silver hand tentatively. "I would be honored to observe human tactical adaptation in real-time applications." "Me too," added Thorgan, his rocky features displaying what might have been eager anticipation. Morin watched this development with fascination. In the span of 1 week, Amy had transformed from an isolated outsider to the focal point of genuine military curiosity. Her fellow cadets were no longer avoiding her. They were actively seeking opportunities to learn from her approach to problems. "Very well," he said, his mandibles clicking with what he now recognized as anticipation rather than dread. "Team-based scenarios it is. Though I should warn you all, human tactical methodology tends to be unconventional." Amy grinned. An expression that Morin was beginning to understand meant the universe was about to become a more interesting place. "Unconventional is just another word for effective," she said, moving toward the equipment rack. "Trust me, this is going to be educational." Morin realized that his combat training classes had just become significantly more entertaining, and possibly more dangerous, than anything he had experienced in 3 decades of military instruction.